So I've got kind of two issues. One is that I say process all the time, but the reason I say process is because methodology sounds way too fancy. It sounds like something you have to plan and something you have to think about. So I say process, but the problem with process is that the way that word is used, it typically just means what happens between various points. It's not necessarily something that's thought out or not thought out. It's not necessarily something that's replicable. So when I say process, I mean steps. And maybe what I should be talking about is methodologies, because a methodology sounds like it has steps, ingredients maybe. So that's the first thing. I'm not talking about the creative process as some ambiguous, magical thing where you can't anticipate what's going to happen and you just let one thing happen and then another. I mean steps that lead consistently to places, hopefully places that you want to be. It's part one. Part two is that none of this is a nice to have. So if you want consistency of output, and I don't mean that you want everything to be the same, though certainly that could be part of it, but if you want to sit down, start a project, and know that it will lead somewhere productive, I think this is really inherent in graphic design, maybe in writing, and potentially developing out things that have to be conceptual. Then process is the difference between just happening to be lucky all the time until you're not, or having to lean on some house style. So like what I used to do circa 2008, 9, if I couldn't come up with an idea and I was running out of time, you got color blocking in all caps, accidents, grotesque, medium, because I didn't have a way of working when I didn't have a concept. Basically, when I didn't get lucky with some random idea that came in my head, then I had a style to lean on. And what I have realized is that, frankly, there were a lot of times I didn't get lucky. And what was even worse was when I didn't realize that I had a style I could lean on, and I was never getting, if you didn't get lucky, you just had creative block or mediocre work or whatever it was. So I view, sorry, I got a cold, I'm sniffling. I view process or methodology as the thing that brings consistency to creative work, consistency of quality, consistent high quality, not consistency of outcome in terms of I don't want to make the same thing again and again. Every time I make something, when it comes to design work specifically, or music or writing, I want to end up somewhere I wasn't expecting to end up, but that is thoughtful and makes sense. And the other thing is that, this can seem so intense, like, oh my God, what's my process? I have to develop a process. It's not a big deal. It's largely just a matter of looking at when things are working and picking apart what you did when they're working, and then becoming more intentional about it, and noticing how often you arrive at a conclusion that was just luck, because luck ain't dependent. So the easy thing is, when you have ideas and they work, what did you do? And when you don't have ideas, what exactly happened there? And then figuring out how to consistently get to a place where you're going to have that idea that you need, where you're not going to feel that doubt about the end product because it's not as rich as your work normally is. Or you might have multiple processes. You might have one process for a certain time frame and another process for a different time frame, or a different process for unpaid work. Stuff you do as favors may have an entirely different process, because there's a freedom to get somewhere even more unexpected. So for me, what ends up happening is that being able to fully articulate a process based on a context, to know, oh, I will do step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. When I do those things, I will have an answer. That's not a nice to have. That's actually what I need when the work is at its worst, when the brief is ambiguous and vague, and unclear, or when I have no background information, or when I have a brutal deadline, but I have to do actual conceptual work. That's when the process is most important. It's not a nice to have, depending on, like, oh, I've got a nice long run up to this project. Let's do a little fancy deep dive process thing. No, the process is for when the situation sucks. That's when the process is important. Because when the situation doesn't suck, there's no stress. And I find that when there's no stress, you're more likely to get lucky, because you're kind of more open to the potential of like a random idea working. But when it gives you anxiety, that's when process is important. And you don't have to make it complicated. You don't have to make it high-minded. It doesn't have to resemble anything else in the world, but it's not a process, or it's not a methodology if you don't know the steps. If it's just go to the library, that's not a process. Because what happens after that? How do you consistently make sure that there's productive output? There should be steps the whole way through. Go to the library is one step. You're literally missing everything else. Do a web search. It's one step. You're literally missing everything else. You should have an understanding of how you're going to get from the beginning to the end, dependent on the context. And don't wait. You know, if you are routinely having creative block, routinely quitting out on projects, or handing in substandard work, you need that process. You need it now. All right, thanks for watching.